Most people look at WrestleMania 4 and see a failure, perhaps a dreaded experiment. I see it, however, as essentially the first ever two-part WrestleMania. Now hear me out. You see, many look back on this WrestleMania as the attempt to make Randy Savage the next huge superstar. And while it certainly was that to a degree, it was actually just a precursor to what would be WrestleMania 5, when Savage would defend the title against Hulk Hogan. The shows would be held at the same place, Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And yes, even with Donald Trump in the crowd, front row center, facing the hard camera nearly the whole show. So here we go, wrestling fans. Here is the short and sweet story that is WrestleMania 4. Of course, as always, before we get started, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And also, please leave a like on the video. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The date was March 27th, 1988. And as mentioned, yes, this was the first of two WrestleMania shows to be held at Trump Plaza. And the fact was known that going in. So this is just ever more the reason why this show is definitely a part one of two. Before we get to all that though, let's set the table. As the year prior, we had closed with Hulk Hogan defeating Andre the Giant. And while WWE history likes to mark that as a passing of the torch, if you will, the feud actually continued all the way into WrestleMania 4 and actually played a key role in setting up the main angle of the show. Andre captured the title from Hogan in February of 1988 after a finish that saw the debut of the Hebners as the twin referee gimmick. And after the match, Andre, quote-unquote, sold the title to Ted Dibiase. This was the first time Vince McMahon ever attempted anything like this, and it was risky. But much like today, Vince had already signed his deal with Trump. The check had been cashed, so Vince was free to get a little creative with the way he painted this picture. And in hindsight, the tournament itself was over 10 matches long. And even with them being short in most cases, that would make for a very tiresome card. But also add in the tournament buffer matches that weren't even a part of the tournament. Yes, it would seem even in 1988, Vince McMahon was wanting to cram all the boys in on the big show and make sure that they all got paid. The show opened up with a battle royal where the only prize was a huge trophy. Yes, much like the shows of today, these battle royals at WrestleMania have been a long-standing tradition. And this just further cements what I just said about getting everyone on the card. The finish of the match saw Bad News Brown turn on Bret Hart after a short-formed alliance, and Brown would win the match while Bret would extract his revenge by destroying the trophy. Just look at Bret Hart being an anti-hero years before it was cool. Then the tournament started with Ted Dibiase defeating Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Dibiase was definitely hot enough as a heel to be one of the favorites here. After all, the spoiled attempt at the championship steal set up this whole show in the first place. So it was very fitting that the tournament would start with him. From there, Don Morocco would defeat Dino Bravo by a DQ to advance. Then Greg Valentine would defeat Ricky Steamboat. So the show was pretty heel heavy to start off. Then we get our first Randy Savage match as he defeated Butch Reed in the first round. After One Man Gang beat Bam Bam and Jake the Snake Roberts and Rick Rude went to a draw. This left Savage as the most over face in the tournament besides Hulk Hogan. Which, speaking of Hogan, as mentioned earlier, a rematch between he and Andre was set for the second round of this tournament. Before that match though, we got the Ultimate Warrior beating Hercules. And this was during Warrior's rise to the top, and pretty early into it, if that. And of course, instead of having him in the tournament, the Battle of the Strongmen here with Hercules was a nice side attraction grudge match. Back to Hogan Andre, this match would end in a double DQ. So neither man would go on. Looking back, I can say that there's so much more that could have been with this tournament, and it definitely seems handcuffed by having both the Jake the Snake and Rick Rude match and the Hogan Andre match end with non-finishes. Essentially, this is a way they could cut the tournament matches down, but I think that most watch this show, and the ones that watched it live definitely could probably see the writing on the wall that you were getting Dibiase and Savage. This may or may not have been the greatest strategy in the world. I don't know. How would you have booked this tournament? Go ahead and let me know down in the comments. Anyway, as I was saying there, Dibiase would go over Morocco and get to go straight to the finals. And while Savage would have to go through Greg Valentine and then One Man Gang in order to get to Dibiase in the final, in between all of this, Brutus Beefcake won a DQ against Intercontinental Champion Honky Tonk Man, which was interesting because Brutus Beefcake, while he did not win the belt, did get to cut the hair of Jimmy Hart, so that's worth something at the very least. The Islanders team of Haku and Tama, along with Bobby Heenan, took on the British Bulldogs and Coco Beware. This match was essentially a comedy match, with the whole gag being that Heenan was scared of the Bulldogs mascot, who was an actual bulldog named Matilda. This match is worth a watch, if nothing else, for the very end, where Davey Boy Smith sicks Matilda on Heenan. Matilda was obviously not a very mean-spirited dog, so Davey is just kind of there like throwing this dog on Heenan, which is quite a sight to see. I wish I could hear Davey Boy tell this story in present day. One last buffer match before the main event. The tag team titles were defended by Demolition as they defeated the team of Strike Force, which was Rick Martell and Tito Santana. Santana was just doomed to be a mid-card workhorse, and at this point was put into this team with Martell, who had just appeared at the WrestleMania prior with a different partner, the Z-Man. Finally, we get to our main event of the evening with all the chips cashed in. We got Ted DiBiase versus Randy Savage, which was definitely a match for the more wrestling purists out there who were perhaps disenchanted with the sports entertainment main events of the first 3 WrestleManias. Either way, this was the crowning moment for one Randy Savage as he captured his first ever WWF Championship. And while there's clearly no Hulk Hogan, this served as an important chapter in what was to come a year later, as Hogan would embrace Savage as his friend and support him as champion, only for their friendship to disintegrate within a year's time. But yes, kids, that's a story for another day and another video. The announced attendance for the show was over 19,000, which, knowing WWE, you could say was probably more or less around 16,000 or so there at best. Still quite the impressive garnering. Now, buy rate wise on pay-per-view, the show actually did a complete dive and was down considerably from WrestleMania 3. Most accredit this due to the uncertainty that surrounded the tournament and what matches they would get exactly. And looking back, people were right to do so, as so much more could have been done with this show and the tournament. And Vince McMahon would attempt this again in November 1998 at Survivor Series, which I think was a much more well-received show for that time frame. For whatever reason, Vince McMahon has shied away from doing this again, at least in a major pay-per-view format. It seems Vince McMahon isn't a fan of the one-night tournaments, and maybe wrestling fans really aren't either. I think that with the nature of wrestling being kind of grifter-esque, it's just a hard sell maybe. I don't know. Why do you think it is that WWE doesn't have more one-night tournament, or at least put them on pay-per-view? Please let me know down in the comments section. I think that about does it. My name is The Brand. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you are subscribed. Until next time, we see you on Pro Wrestling Planet.